Have you ever sat in a place you worked your whole life to reach, only to be told you didn't belong? Imagine settling into your first-class seat, ticket in hand, heart steady with quiet pride, and then, in front of dozens of strangers, being doubted, humiliated, even struck, simply because of how you look. What choice would you make in that moment? Would you shrink back, swallow the injustice, and hope it passed, or would you stand tall, even as the world watched, and turn pain into power? This is the story of Naomi Reynolds, a woman whose calm strength collided with cruelty at 34,000 feet, and whose true identity transformed a cabin of doubt into a courtroom of reckoning. And as you hear her journey, you might ask yourself, if it were you, what would you do? Stay with us, because this isn't just about one woman's dignity. It's about every seat we've ever been told we didn't deserve, every room where respect was withheld, and it's about the courage to claim what's rightfully ours. If you believe in justice, dignity, and the power of truth, please like, share, and subscribe. Then join us as we step into this unforgettable flight. The sound came like a crack of thunder in a place built for quiet luxury. A hand swept across Naomi Reynolds' cheek, the sting immediate, the sharp taste of copper flooding her mouth. For a heartbeat, the cabin of Aurora Airways Flight 762 stopped breathing. The hum of the engines, the muted rustle of leather seats, the chatter of passengers. It all froze in the wake of that violent gesture. Heather Cole, the senior flight attendant in her crisp uniform, stood over Naomi with fire in her eyes, her palms still trembling from the force of the strike. 50 passengers, tucked into the gold-trimmed world of first class, sat suspended between disbelief and silent shock. Naomi did not cry out. She did not flinch again. She remained seated in 2A, her hand slowly touching the side of her face where the slap had landed. The heat radiated outward, a brand of humiliation meant to sear her spirit. Yet, when she lifted her gaze, her eyes were cold. There were no tears. There was no pleading, only a silence so heavy it pressed against every chest in the cabin. Phones clicked awake. Screens glowed. A few passengers leaned into the aisle to capture the scene on video, uncertain if what they had just witnessed was even real. Heather's breathing came ragged, her chest rising and falling. "You people think you can just sit wherever you want." She spat, her voice cracking under the strain. The words floated in the pressurized air, thick with contempt. Naomi's lips parted as if to speak, but she closed them again. A storm was gathering, inside and out. This slap was not the conclusion. It was the ignition of something larger, something irreversible. 20 minutes earlier, none of this had existed. Naomi had walked calmly down the jet bridge, a navy cardigan draped over her shoulders, well-worn leather bag against her hip. She didn't look like the kind of passenger most people associated with first-class, no designer luggage, no bold jewelry, no expensive perfume. She moved with the unhurried pace of someone who had traveled too many times to count. She had done this deliberately. As CEO of Aurora Airways, Naomi could have boarded with an entourage, announced to the crew with a subtle nod, claimed her seat with the protection of recognition. But tonight, she had chosen differently. She had booked under her maiden name, Reynolds, a detail only her closest aides knew. She wanted to experience the airline through the eyes of a regular traveler. No shields, no titles, no perks, just another passenger at 36,000 feet. What she found instead was a mirror, one that reflected back the ugliest truths she already knew, lurked in corners of the world she fought to change. Heather Cole had spotted Naomi the moment she entered the cabin. Heather was seasoned 15 years of service in first class, 15 years of knowing exactly who belonged here and who did not. The investment bankers with their Bluetooth headsets, the Hollywood producers with gold watches heavy enough to anchor a ship, the politicians with perfect smiles and restless eyes. Naomi, in her simple cardigan and jeans, was not one of them. Heather's stare had lingered too long, and when Naomi set her bag into the overhead bin and slid into seat 2A, Heather approached with the kind of false courtesy that carried sharp edges. "I'll need to see your boarding pass again," Heather had said, her tone already different from the one she had used with other passengers. Naomi had offered it without hesitation, her smile polite, controlled. But Heather's suspicion had not eased. And now, 20 minutes later, here they were, Naomi with a red mark blooming across her cheek, Heather trembling, passengers torn between outrage and secret satisfaction. Naomi inhaled slowly, steadying herself. She thought of her grandmother, who had told stories of being turned away from lunch counters. She thought of her mother, who had walked into an all-white high school for the first time, her head high despite the jeers. And she thought of every boardroom she had entered, every contract she had negotiated, every time someone had looked at her and assumed she was less. The slap was just flesh meeting flesh, but it carried the weight of centuries. Naomi rose slightly in her seat, her voice low, deliberate. "Did you just assault me?" Her tone cut through the silence like a blade. Some passengers gasped. Others whispered. Edward Blake, seated across the aisle, leaned toward his wife, Linda. "Finally, someone had the guts," he muttered, unaware his words were already being recorded by 3 different phones. Linda smirked, her eyes never leaving Naomi, but just behind them, Dr. Alicia Parker, a physician in her 40s, stood abruptly. "That was completely uncalled for," she shouted, her voice steady. "You can't put your hands on passengers." The divide in the cabin grew clearer, some emboldened by prejudice, others galvanized by conscience. Heather's composure cracked. "She doesn't belong here," she hissed. "I know when someone's trying to scam the system." Naomi's expression didn't shift. She leaned back slowly, her cheek throbbing, her hand resting calmly on the armrest. Her silence now was louder than Heather's shriek. This was not over. It was only beginning. 20 minutes before the slap, there had been only the quiet shuffle of passengers boarding Aurora Airways Flight 762. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel, and the citrus polish used to wipe down the leather seats. First class was already filling with the familiar types men in tailored suits juggling phone calls, women with designer handbags, a couple reading the Wall Street Journal as if it were a prop. And then came Naomi Reynolds. She walked down the jet bridge without haste, shoulders relaxed beneath a navy cardigan. Her jeans were plain, her shoes practical, her bag a scuffed brown leather messenger that had traveled with her for years. Nothing about her announced status or privilege. Naomi had built her life on blending in when she chose to, despite being the head of Aurora Airways. Tonight, she wanted to see what it felt like to travel without her title as a shield. To board a plane not as a CEO, but simply as a woman making her way from Los Angeles to New York. Her boarding pass, printed under her maiden name, Reynolds, slipped easily into the scanner. No special greetings from the gate crew, no hint of recognition. Just a quiet beep and a perfunctory, "Have a good flight." Naomi liked it that way. She stepped into the cabin and felt the sudden shift of eyes. A few passengers glanced up, quick and assessing, their expressions barely flickering before they returned to screens or newspapers. But Heather Cole's stare lingered. Heather had been arranging glasses on a silver tray, the crisp white of her uniform sharp against the muted beige of the cabin. She paused mid-motion, watching Naomi stow her bag and lower herself into seat 2A. Something in her gaze was calculating, a silent question of whether this woman fit the invisible mold she carried in her head for first class. Naomi noticed, she always noticed, the way people's eyes narrowed, the way their voices shifted tone, the way suspicion sometimes entered the room before she even said her name. But she didn't react. Not yet. She pulled her laptop from her bag, its casing scratched and covered with years of use, and set it gently on her lap, beside her. The seat remained empty for now, though she knew someone would soon take it. She exhaled, a soft release of breath, preparing for 5 quiet hours in the air. But the quiet would not last. Heather approached after a moment, her smile fixed but strained. "Boarding pass. Please." Naomi looked up, mildly surprised. She had just shown it at the gate, but she reached calmly into her bag again. Of course. Heather scanned the slip of paper, her eyes lingering on the name. Naomi Reynolds. And do you have a photo ID to match this? There was no request like this for the suited man in 1C or the couple in 3D. Naomi handed over her driver's license, her hand steady, her eyes patient. Heather compared the photo longer than necessary, glancing between the laminated card and the real woman. When she finally handed it back, her voice held an edge. "All right, you can sit." Naomi smiled faintly, but inside, a familiar knot tightened. She thought of the first time she'd been asked to step aside in a boutique because that dress is out of your price range. She thought of the job interview where the receptionist had assumed she was there to deliver coffee. The patterns were always the same. Edward Blake, seated across the aisle, leaned toward his wife, Linda. "I wonder how she got the ticket," he whispered, though not quietly enough, probably points or some kind of discount. Linda chuckled softly, nodding. You can always tell. Naomi heard them. She always heard. Her ears had been trained over decades to catch the quiet judgments whispered at the edge of civility. She sat a little straighter, opening her laptop and letting the glow of the screen wash over her. She typed a few notes for herself. Flight 762, Gate 23. Boarding staff neutral, cabin crew watchful. She added Heather's name, memorized from the badge pinned to her uniform. Then she closed her eyes for a moment, her hand resting lightly on the armrest. She thought about why she had chosen this night, this flight, this anonymity, because leaders who never see the truth of their own companies can't fix what's broken. Because sometimes, the only way to know what ordinary passengers endure is to walk through the gate without privilege. Because dignity doesn't come from titles. It comes from how people treat you when they think you have none. Naomi opened her eyes. She had no idea how quickly this decision to travel as no one special would unravel into something unforgettable. For now, though, it was just a quiet boarding and a storm waiting to form. The first-class cabin was supposed to feel effortless. Glasses of champagne, the warm scent of baked bread rolls, the muted chime of safety announcements. But Naomi Reynolds could already sense the weight of eyes pressing against her. Heather Cole lingered near the galley, watching Naomi the way a security guard might watch someone browsing without buying. She leaned toward Ryan Fisher, her junior colleague, and whispered, though the words carried farther than she realized. "She doesn't look right for this section." Ryan shifted uncomfortably. He had seen Heather in moods before, but there was a sharpness tonight, something that seemed more personal than professional. "She gave you her ID," he said quietly. "Everything matched." Heather's lips tightened. "People fake things. Happens more than you think." Naomi kept her gaze steady on her laptop screen, but every syllable of that conversation reached her. She typed another note, her fingers calm. Her heartbeat, less so cabin crew suspicion, persists despite verification. Edward Blake chuckled from across the aisle, sipping his champagne. "Called it," he said to his wife Linda. "Probably scammed her way in here with a buddy pass or something." Linda leaned in, her voice sweet but dripping with disdain. "They always give themselves away. Doesn't carry herself like the others." "Does she?" Naomi inhaled slowly, her hands folding over the keyboard. She had heard variations of those words her entire life. She remembered sitting in a restaurant at 20, told her card might not clear until she produced cash up front. She remembered being mistaken for an assistant in her early career, even as she led entire teams. But what pierced her tonight wasn't the originality of the insult, it was the familiarity. How easily strangers believed they could shrink her into something small, unworthy, misplaced. Heather approached again, tray balanced with practiced ease. She offered champagne to Edward, a smile brightening her face. Linda received her glass with a nod. Seat 1C was offered warm nuts. 3D a refill. Heather turned smoothly back toward the galley without so much as glancing at Naomi. The omission wasn't an accident. Naomi watched her retreat, the corners of her mouth tightening. She didn't need champagne, but she knew this gesture was about more than service. It was about exclusion, about making her presence feel provisional, conditional. Ryan hesitated at the galley curtain. Glancing back, his eyes met Naomi's for a fleeting second, then darted away. He wasn't blind to what was happening. He just wasn't brave enough to stop it. Naomi closed her laptop and leaned back in her seat. She let the low murmur of the cabin wash over her. Every laugh, every clink of glass, every sideways glance seemed to pile on top of her. For a moment, she considered reaching into her bag, pulling out her business card, revealing everything with one flick of her wrist. She imagined Heather's face blanching, Edward choking on his champagne, Linda's smirk dissolving. It would be satisfying. But then, what the problem would vanish, but so would the truth. They would never see themselves clearly if she revealed her shield too soon. No, she thought, not yet. She wanted to know how far they would go when they believed she was powerless. She wanted to know exactly how her own employees treated a woman like her when she wasn't cloaked in authority. She straightened her cardigan, her cheeks still faintly warm from Heather's earlier scrutiny. She whispered under her breath, too soft for anyone else to hear, "Let's see where this goes." Heather returned once more, arms crossed loosely, her tone now louder, sharp enough for nearby passengers to catch. "I'm going to need to recheck your ticket. There have been issues with fraudulent bookings." Naomi tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "You've seen my boarding pass and ID already. What exactly needs to be verified?" Heather exchanged a glance with Ryan, who shifted uneasily. "It's just standard procedure when something feels off," she said, her voice heavy with implication. Edward leaned back in his seat, grinning like an audience member at a show. Linda adjusted her scarf, eyes bright with satisfaction. Naomi felt the knot in her stomach twist, but her voice remained level. Is this procedure applied to all passengers here tonight, or just me? Heather hesitated. A shadow of red crossed her cheeks, but she doubled down. When we have reasonable suspicion. Yes. The words hung in the air like smoke. Naomi's fingers tightened around her armrest. Reasonable suspicion. She'd heard that phrase before. In stores, in airports, in offices. It was the modern mask of prejudice, a phrase that sounded professional while carrying the weight of bias. She forced herself to stay calm, to breathe evenly. She reached for her phone, her thumbs moving quickly. Need legal standby. Flight 762. Possible discrimination incident in progress. She pressed send, the message flying invisibly toward her legal counsel waiting on the ground. Heather's eyes narrowed. Please put your phone away. You're disrupting pre-flight procedures. Naomi looked around. Half the cabin had their phones out, some already recording. None of them had been asked to stop. Her voice was calm, almost soft. I see other passengers using their phones. Heather's answer came sharp and loud. Those passengers aren't causing problems. Naomi set the phone back on her lap, her eyes never leaving Heather's. I haven't caused a problem either, unless sitting quietly in my seat counts as one. The air grew heavier, the cabin waiting. Passengers leaned forward, sensing the drama unfolding, their screens glowing brighter. Suspicion was no longer just in the air. It was written into every glance, every whispered word, every unnecessary demand. And Naomi knew this was only the beginning. The cabin lights dimmed to their pre-flight glow, warm enough to soften sharp edges, but not enough to hide tension. Naomi Reynolds sat still in seat 2A, her hands folded over her lap. Around her, champagne glasses clinked, hushed laughter spread between seats, and yet she felt a wall rising, a barrier between her and everyone else. Heather Cole moved briskly down the aisle, her polished shoes clicking against the carpet. She smiled at Edward and Linda Blake as she topped off their drinks, her tone sweet and practiced. To Naomi, she offered nothing, not a smile, not a word, not even eye contact. Ryan Fisher hovered near the galley, his body language tight. Naomi caught his glance again, the brief flash of guilt in his eyes before he turned away. He wanted to step in, but fear, or perhaps habit, kept him tethered to silence. Naomi's throat tightened. She reached for the small bottle of water tucked into the side pocket. The foil crinkled loudly as she twisted it open, the sound somehow too sharp in the quiet. She took a sip, trying to wash away the lump forming inside her chest. First class was supposed to feel effortless, a place where passengers were cocooned in comfort, where staff anticipated needs before words were spoken. But for Naomi, the air was charged with scrutiny. It was as though she had stepped into a spotlight she never asked for, one that magnified every move she made. She looked down the aisle. Couples leaned close, conspiratorial. A man scrolled through his phone with headphones in. Two women compared photos from their trip to Hawaii. Naomi's presence, though, seemed to draw a different kind of attention. Quick stares, half smiles that weren't friendly, the kind of looks that said, "You don't belong." The ache in her cheek reminded her of Heather's earlier hostility. She brushed her fingertips against the skin still tender, though no one else in the cabin cared to notice. Naomi shifted in her seat, pulling the cardigan tighter around her shoulders. A thought flickered. Unbidden, I could end this right now. All she had to do was reach into her bag, take out her ID badge, the one marked with the golden crest of Aurora Airways, and flash it. The performance would collapse in an instant. Heather would pale. Ryan would stumble. The Blakes would choke on their champagne. For a moment, Naomi pictured it vividly. The hush, the apologies, the scrambling to fix what had already been broken. The image gave her a measure of satisfaction. But another thought cut through. If I end it now, I'll never see the truth to its end. Naomi wasn't here tonight as the CEO. She was here as the passenger she could have been, the one millions of others were each day. People without titles, people without shields, people who lived the consequences of this treatment without an audience, without justice. She closed her eyes, resting her head back. The hum of the engines began to rise as the aircraft prepared for pushback. In her mind, she traveled backward through time. She was 12, standing in a grocery line with her mother, watching a cashier check their money twice while waving the next customer through without a glance. She was 22, interviewing for her first corporate job, watching the recruiter's eyes flick past her resume to linger on her skin instead. She was 35, already a vice president, asked by a hotel bellhop if she was with the catering staff when she arrived for a board retreat. Each memory pressed down like weight upon her chest. And yet, woven through them all, there had always been resolve. Each wound had scarred into something stronger. Her phone buzzed lightly in her lap. A message from her attorney flashed across the screen. Standing by. Document everything. Naomi exhaled. She typed back quickly. Already am. The aircraft began to taxi, and the lights of Los Angeles shimmering outside the window. Naomi glanced at the reflection in the glass. A woman calm on the outside, but inside a storm. Her solitude deepened as the cabin crew moved down the aisle one last time before takeoff. Heather avoided her row completely. Ryan hesitated, but when Heather caught his eye, he quickened his pace and followed orders. Naomi sat alone in the middle of it all, isolated, invisible, and yet, paradoxically, the center of attention. She leaned her head back against the seat, whispering to herself in a voice only she could hear. You wanted the truth. Well, here it is. Don't break now. The engines roared louder, pressing her into her seat as the aircraft accelerated down the runway. Naomi's stomach tightened with the familiar pull of takeoff. Yet it wasn't the climb that unsettled her. It was the knowing, the undeniable certainty that what had begun as subtle suspicion was about to turn into something far more brutal, and she would have to decide again how long she could endure before revealing who she truly was. For now, though, Naomi remained still, her face angled toward the window, the glow of the city shrinking beneath the clouds, alone, unseen, but unbroken. The cabin might have tried to isolate her, but she carried an inner strength no one could erase. Not Heather, not the Blakes, not even the weight of history. The seatbelt sign blinked off. The cabin settled into the steady hush that comes after climb. A soft ding. A cart rolling free from its brake. Whispered requests for drinks. It should have been quiet. It should have been simple. Heather Cole stepped out from the galley like she had a mission stitched into her uniform. Her shoulders were squared, her chin was set. She stopped at 2A and looked down at Naomi Reynolds without a smile. Ma'am, I'm going to need to re-verify your documentation. Her voice carried far enough for 2 rows to hear. Naomi lifted her eyes. "You've already examined my boarding pass and my ID." Heather did not blink. "We've had issues recently with fraudulent bookings. People moving into seats they didn't pay for. I have to be sure." Edward Blake leaned out across the aisle, eager. "Finally, some order in here," he said to no one and everyone. Linda gave a delicate laugh that sounded like ice in a glass. Naomi felt the knot return, that small hard thing pressed just under her breastbone. She kept her tone even. "Is this re-verification being done for the rest of first class as well?" Heather's lips tightened. "It's done when we have reasonable suspicion." The words landed heavy, a phrase that wore a professional suit and carried a very old shadow. Ryan Fisher stood 2 paces behind Heather. He shifted his weight. His eyes touched Naomi's for a fraction of a second, then slid away. "Heather," he started. Heather cut him with a glance. "Ryan, call the cockpit. I want Captain O'Connor aware of a potential ticket irregularity in 2A." Naomi's breath stayed slow, in, out, in, out. She could feel the cabin watching her, not just the faces she could see, the phones angled discreetly, the screens already open, the story forming in the hands of strangers. She pressed her phone awake on her lap. A new message from her counsel waited like a steady hand on her shoulder. "Standing by. Document everything. You're not alone." She typed without looking down. "Situation escalating. Crew citing reasonable suspicion, requesting re-verification mid-flight. Cabin witnesses present." She hit send. She placed the phone face down. She kept her gaze on Heather. "I will cooperate with any lawful request," Naomi said softly, "but I will not accept standards that apply only to me." The aisle seemed to narrow. The air felt thinner. Heather exhaled through her nose, as if patience were a favor she could grant or withhold. "Let's do this the easy way. Email confirmation. Last 4 digits of the card used to purchase. Some verification that matches our system." Naomi tilted her head. Calm, precise. "I purchased my ticket through our corporate portal." She let those words hang. Ordinary words, true words, nothing more. Heather did not hear what was in them, or chose not to. "Then show me the email from that portal." Naomi's cheeks still carried the dull warmth from earlier scorn, now fed by rising heat at her temples. She kept her voice level. "A moment, please." She unlocked her phone. She opened the confirmation. She held the screen up. Heather scanned it. Her mouth set. "This says Reynolds," she said, as if revealing a trick, "but your email domain suggests corporate employment." "It does," Naomi said. "So, is this a company freebie?" Edward crowed, knew it. "It is a purchased first-class fare," Naomi replied, still to Heather, not to him. "Paid in full." Ryan's interphone buzzed. He turned, listened, then nodded. He looked almost relieved to have a task that didn't involve choosing a side. He stepped forward. "Captain O'Connor would like to speak with you. Heather." Heather took the handset in the galley and angled her body away. Naomi watched the back of her uniform, the line of tension between her shoulder blades. Ryan stood nearby, holding the service cart like a shield. When Heather returned, her voice pitched lower, but the edge had sharpened. "The captain says all irregularities need to be addressed and documented. He wants ground operations looped in. We'll be contacting our supervisor in Los Angeles." Naomi's mind flashed through the logistics. A mid-air irregularity. A captain who didn't want a mess at altitude? A ground supervisor who would hear only one version of the story first? She pictured Michael Grant's face, proud, bureaucratic, convinced he knew order when he saw it. She had sat across conference tables for men like him. She had promoted some. She had also let some go. "While you contact whoever you need," Naomi said. "I would like water," and the same service offered to other passengers. Heather stared. For a second. Just a second. Something like uncertainty flickered. Then the mask slid back into place. "Service is at the discretion of the crew." "Which is to say," Naomi answered gently, "at your discretion." Heather lifted her chin. "At the discretion of safety and policy." Behind her. Linda clucked her tongue and shook her head, as if scolding a child she didn't know. Edward enjoyed the show with the lazy hunger of a man who has never had to worry about a verdict turning against him. Dr. Alicia Parker unbuckled in 3C. She stood, calm and straight. "I'm a physician," she said, her voice clear. "I've been watching since boarding. The passenger in 2A has complied with every request. She's not a threat. She's not disruptive." Heather's eyes flashed. "Ma'am, please remain seated while we resolve a security concern." Alicia held her ground. "Your concern is not about security. It's about perception, and your perception is biased." The words stroked the cabin the wrong way and made it bristle. Some heads snapped up, some eyes narrowed, some phones pointed more directly. Alicia didn't flinch. She looked at Naomi and gave the smallest nod. "I see you. I'm here." Ryan spoke, quiet, like he wanted his voice to carry only to the right people. "Heather, can we just serve the cabin? We can document and be decent at the same time." Heather didn't answer him. She pressed the interphone again and asked the cockpit to patch through to ground. There was a pause, a series of clicks, the open-air feeling of a company line connecting two worlds that usually met only when something went wrong. "This is Heather Cole. Flight 762, she said into the mouthpiece. "I'm reporting a suspected ticket issue in first class. Seat 2A. Passenger provided ID and confirmation, but there are inconsistencies that warrant verification." Naomi heard her name and seat number roll through the air like coordinates on a map. She felt the familiar anger try to break through. She quieted it with a breath. Anger could be noise. She needed signal. "Let me speak to your supervisor," Heather said. "Michael Grant." Ryan's jaw tightened. He stared at the carpet. Naomi watched him and thought of young employees everywhere who learned when to look away to keep their jobs. She wondered how many times he had swallowed truth to survive a shift. The line clicked again. Heather straightened. "Mr. Grant." "Yes." "We have a passenger in 2A refusing to comply with verification. I have reasonable suspicion about her ticket and behavior." Naomi rose 1 inch in her seat, not enough to stand, just enough to enter the call without touching a phone. "I have complied," she said, not loudly, but with clarity. "Boarding pass, identification, confirmation email. I am asking only to be treated like every other passenger in this cabin." Michael Grant's voice arrived tinny through the speaker. Masculine and sure. "If a crew member believes a passenger might be in a seat they didn't purchase, we must proceed with caution. Ma'am, if you cannot provide additional proof, we may need you moved until we can verify." A murmur moved through first class. Some took comfort in the word procedure. Some smiled. Hunger satisfied. Alicia's hands curled at her sides. Naomi looked at Heather, not at the interphone. What additional proof would satisfy you? Exactly. Heather hesitated. For the first time, the vagueness of her position betrayed her. Payment details, company authorization, something official. Naomi's inner voice spoke in the stillness of her mind. You could end this. One sentence, one name, one call. Do it, and they will scramble to fix it. Do it, and this ends. Another voice rose to meet it. If you end it now, you will save yourself and lose the truth. No one will learn. Nothing will change. You came to see. Let yourself see. She tasted the copper again. She saw her mother at that lunch counter, her grandmother's hand on hers. She felt the weight transform into backbone. I will not surrender my private payment information to a flight attendant to satisfy her suspicion. Naomi said, calm as a level, and I will not be receipted from a ticket I lawfully purchased. If you believe there is a legitimate error, you may verify it electronically using the systems available to you. I will remain in my seat. Heather's eyes went hard. Then you're refusing a crew directive. I am refusing an unequal directive. Naomi replied. The interphone crackled. Michael's tone cooled. If a passenger refuses a lawful directive, we may divert or take other measures. Captain O'Connor will decide. For a breath, even the engines seemed to quiet. The word divert floated and settled. Phones lifted a little higher. Captain James O'Connor stepped out of the cockpit a minute later, hat off, jaw tight from the weight of command. He approached without theatrics. He stopped at 2A and crouched slightly so his eyes met Naomi's. Ma'am, he said, I'm James O'Connor. I understand there's a concern. May I see your documents? Naomi handed them over. He studied them carefully. He looked at the confirmation on her phone. He returned everything gently. These appear in order. Heather's cheeks flushed. Captain, there are still inconsistencies. O'Connor's gaze moved to her. Then we can verify with ground without escalating the situation. He kept his tone neutral, but it carried a line pilots learn early, de-escalate when you can, keep the cabin safe. He turned back to Naomi. Thank you for your patience. Naomi held his eyes. Thank you for yours. He nodded once and stood. Ms. Cole, Mr. Fisher, he said to the crew, proceed with normal service. I will coordinate with operations. He started to turn away. Heather's control slipped. Something in her tightened and snapped. Normal service, she repeated. When she's obviously Ms. Cole, the captain warned. Heather swallowed. Yes, Captain. He returned to the cockpit. The curtain fell back into place. For 10 seconds, the cabin breathed again. Ryan stepped toward the cart. Can I get you water, Ms. Reynolds? He asked, voice small but sincere. Naomi nodded. Thank you. He poured. His hand shook just enough to ring the glass. Heather stared at the water, stared at Naomi, stared through Ryan. Her pride would not let this end here, not with a glass of water and a quiet return to service. She pivoted, grabbed the interphone again, and spoke low enough that only the nearest Rose could hear. Mr. Grant, I want security at the gate when we land. If she refuses again, we remove her. I want it on record I made that request. She hung up. She turned back. Enjoy your water, she said, voice thin with rage. Naomi lifted the glass. She took one slow sip. She set it down. She folded her hands again. Her cheek throbbed with memory and warning. Something brittle was forming in the space between them. One more word could break it. One more minute could, too. The cabin had the feeling of a match waiting for a strike, and the strike was coming. The hum of the engines pressed steady against the cabin walls. The smell of reheated rolls drifted faintly from the galley. For a moment, Aurora Airways Flight 762 seemed ready to settle back into the rhythm of routine. But Heather Cole couldn't let it go. Her mind replayed the captain's measured tone, his subtle rebuke, his insistence on normal service. It felt like betrayal. She had worked 15 years to command respect in the aisle, and here was a passenger, this woman, dressed without polish, answering calmly when she should have shrunk, dismantling that respect one quiet word at a time. Heather's hands trembled at her sides. She told herself it was indignation. She told herself it was duty. But under it all was something she didn't want to name. She returned to 2A with a stiffness in her shoulders that anyone watching could mistake for authority. "Ma'am," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut, "you're going to need to put your phone away now. You're distracting passengers, and you've been non-compliant long enough." Naomi Reynolds turned her head. Her phone rested, dark, on the tray table. "I haven't used my phone since showing my confirmation." "You're making this difficult," Heather snapped. Naomi's voice was steady, but low enough that only Heather and a few nearby passengers caught it. "You've made this difficult since the moment I sat down." Edward Blake leaned forward, eyes bright, savoring the conflict. "Just toss her out already," he muttered, loud enough for half the row to hear. Linda nodded, lips pursed. Heather's pulse surged. She felt the cabin tilt toward her, waiting, backing her authority, daring her to act. And then she did. Her hand rose before her mind caught up. A sharp, open-palmed crack landed across Naomi's cheek. The sound carried like a pistol shot. Every head turned, every breath stopped, every phone lifted higher. Naomi's face snapped to the side. A sting bloomed across her skin, spread in heat, sharp as wire. For one suspended heartbeat, silence wrapped the cabin so tightly it felt like the air had been stolen. Then voices broke. "My God," a woman gasped. "You can't do that, Dr." Alicia Parker's chair screeched back as she rose. "That's assault. She deserved it." Edward barked, triumphant, his fist pumping like he was at a game. Linda's voice iced the air. Maybe now she'll learn her place. Phones captured it all. Angles from across the cabin froze Heather's hand mid-swing, Naomi's head turning, the look of shock on half the aisle. Heather's chest heaved. For an instant, the satisfaction was real. She had made the cabin hers again. But it lasted no longer than a breath, because Naomi turned back, slowly, with a stillness that made every eye lean closer. Her cheek burned red. A thin cut where Heather's ring had caught her skin leaked a bright bead of blood. But Naomi didn't cry, didn't raise her voice, didn't flinch. She spoke, quiet enough to force silence. "Did you just assault me?" Her words were calm, but the calm was dangerous. Heather's throat went dry. She wanted to laugh it off, but the sound caught and died. Michael Grant's voice crackled faintly over the interphone still dangling in the galley. "Status update." Cole Heather swallowed. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. The cabin had already chosen sides. Dr. Parker's phone was recording full view. Others streamed directly to social media. Twitter hashtags ticked upward in real time just outside the aluminum walls. Naomi reached for her phone, slowly, deliberately. She pressed one number. She lifted it to her ear. Her voice carried, clear. "This is Naomi Reynolds." I've just been physically assaulted by a member of the cabin crew on Flight 762. I need immediate legal response." Heather's stomach dropped at the name. She knew it from somewhere, faintly, but panic smothered memory. Michael Grant's voice came louder now, through Ryan's interphone. "Security will meet you at the gate. If the passenger refuses to deplane voluntarily, escort her off. We can't have disruptions in the premium cabin." Ryan froze. He looked at Naomi, then at Heather. His voice cracked. "She's not disruptive. She's sitting here quietly." Heather spun toward him. "Do your job." The aisle filled with noise shouts, gasps, the furious tremble of passengers caught between outrage and spectacle. Naomi stood, not rushed, not trembling. She rose until her presence filled the narrow aisle like light through a doorway. She looked directly at Heather. "You don't know who you just hit, do you?" Heather blinked. "I know exactly." Naomi's voice cut through. "My name is Naomi Reynolds. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Aurora Airways. This is my airline. This is my plane. And you have made the worst mistake of your career." The silence that followed was not stillness but shock. The words reached every row like an aftershock rolling across land. Passengers scrambled for confirmation. Phones opened, fingers typed, images filled screens, corporate pages, press photos, interviews, the same face that now stood in front of them, blood on her cheek, eyes steady. "Doctor." Parker lifted her phone for all around her to see. "She's telling the truth." Heather staggered back a step, her hands shaking. That, no Edward's voice cracked in disbelief. "She can't be." But Linda's phone already showed the evidence. Her lips parted without sound. Michael Grant's voice thundered from the line. "Repeat that name." Naomi turned her gaze to the interphone. "You heard me, Mr. Grant, and you will be explaining this to the board within the hour." Ryan's face drained pale. His eyes darted from Naomi to Heather to the cockpit curtain. The cabin erupted. Some clapped, some shouted, some cursed, but no one looked away. Heather sank into a jump seat, her knees failing. She covered her mouth with her hand. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know." Naomi's eyes, steady, cold but alive with purpose, found her. "You weren't supposed to know my title to treat me with dignity. You were supposed to do it because I am a human being." The phones kept rolling. The story had already escaped the fuselage, racing into the night sky faster than the jet itself. The revelation rippled through the cabin like a detonation. Naomi Reynolds, CEO of Aurora Airways, stood tall in the aisle, the welt still red on her cheek. Half the passengers craned their necks, their phones lifted to capture the moment. The other half whispered, shifting uneasily in their seats as if they had just realized they were inside a history-making scandal. Heather Cole's body felt as if it had been hollowed out. Her knees were weak, her lips dry. She clutched the armrest of the jump seat as if it were a lifeline. "She can't be, she can't," she murmured, though the images on every glowing screen around her screamed otherwise. Michael Grant's voice came through the interphone again, sharp, anxious. "Cole, clarify. Did you say Reynolds, as in Naomi Reynolds?" Naomi didn't flinch. "Yes, Mr. Grant, and every word of this has been documented by your crew and your passengers, including the assault." Gasps and murmurs rolled from row to row. Edward Blake, who had been smirking for most of the confrontation, sputtered. This is absurd. She was provoking you. Look at her, dressed like." He stopped mid-sentence when Linda tugged at his sleeve, her phone glowing in her hand. "Edward," she whispered, eyes wide. "It's true. Look." Edward stared at the screen. The corporate press photo, the Forbes profile, the interview with CNBC, it was all there. The same woman now standing a few feet away. Calm, resolute, bleeding. "Doctor." Alicia Parker stepped forward, her voice strong and certain. "Miss Reynolds, I'm prepared to give a full medical statement. I saw the strike. I see the laceration. You've been physically assaulted, and I have the entire thing recorded." Naomi gave her a brief nod. "Thank you. Doctor, your witness account will matter." Captain James O'Connor emerged from the cockpit, his face pale. He took in the scene, the passengers buzzing like hornets, Heather trembling in her seat, Ryan Fisher standing frozen beside the service cart. Then his eyes landed on Naomi. Recognition flickered instantly. He had seen her photo in quarterly leadership updates, in training modules, in corporate announcements. He removed his cap and spoke with the gravity of someone who knew his career now hung in balance. "Miss Reynolds, on behalf of this crew, I want to apologize. This is not what Aurora Airways stands for." Naomi's gaze met his. "Captain, apologies don't repair systemic rot. What happened here tonight isn't an accident, it's a symptom." Her words carried, and the passengers quieted to hear her. Heather flinched as if struck again, her tears finally breaking. She pressed her palms to her face, whispering, "I didn't know. I didn't know." Naomi turned toward her, calm but unsparing. "You didn't need to know my title to treat me with respect. You just needed to see me as human. Phones recorded, the hashtags multiplied, the Aurora assault. Justice in the skies. He's CEO in first class." Ryan finally found his voice. It was shaky but clear. "Captain." Miss Reynolds complied with every request. She showed ID, confirmation, boarding pass. She wasn't disruptive. Heather escalated it. The captain nodded grimly. "I'll be including that in my incident report." Michael Grant's voice once again broke through the interphone. "Captain, we need control of this situation. Remove the passenger if necessary before this spirals further." O'Connor's jaw tightened. He stared at the handset, then back at Naomi. "Mr. Grant, with all respect, I think the situation has already spiraled beyond your control." Passengers laughed bitterly. Some clapped. Naomi raised her phone again, pressing speaker. She dialed with calm precision. After a few rings, a deep voice answered. "Naomi, this is Richard Coleman, the chairman of Aurora's board." The name alone silenced the cabin further. Naomi spoke clearly, knowing every phone around her was catching every syllable. "Richard, I've been assaulted by a senior flight attendant on Flight 762. Passengers and staff witnessed it. It is already live across social media." Coleman's voice sharpened instantly. "Are you injured? I have a laceration on my cheek. Dr. Parker is documenting, and the crew responsible, still on duty. Mr. Grant attempted to have me removed instead of addressing the misconduct." A low hiss of disapproval rose from passengers. Edward sank lower in his seat. Coleman's tone carried steel. "Grant, are you on this line?" Heather's face drained white. Ryan swallowed. Captain O'Connor's lips pressed tight. "Yes, sir," Grant stammered, faint but audible. Coleman thundered, "You allowed an executive, no, any passenger to be assaulted under your supervision. You threatened to remove the victim. Consider this your last act in an Aurora uniform." Gasps, a ripple of shocked laughter. A smattering of applause. Naomi lowered the phone slightly, her eyes never leaving Heather. Justice doesn't wait for a meeting. Richard, it happens here, in real time. Coleman's voice came firm. You have full authority. Handle it as you see fit. The board stands behind you. The line clicked dead. Naomi looked around the cabin. Every eye was on her. She breathed deeply, steadying herself against the roar of adrenaline, grief, and resolve inside her chest. Then she spoke, her voice calm but commanding. Heather Cole, you are relieved of duty, effective immediately. Ryan Fisher, you'll remain in service under Captain O'Connor's direction. Mr. Grant, you are terminated, effective now. Security will escort you from Aurora property within the hour. Heather let out a strangled sob. Ryan's face turned ashen, but he gave a shaky nod of acknowledgement. The cabin erupted again, cheers from some, gasps from others, phones capturing every second. Naomi didn't flinch. She touched the edge of her cheek gently, the sting reminding her of her grandmother's stories, of marches, of hands held across decades. Then she straightened, her voice steady. This plane will not take off until every discriminatory act is accounted for, and this airline will not continue unchanged after tonight. Her words hung in the air like prophecy. For a long moment, the cabin felt like a courtroom without walls. The jurors were 50 passengers with phones in their hands, and the verdict was already clear. Naomi Reynolds stood steady, her cheek still marked with the bright outline of Heather Cole's hand. Her breath was calm, her words precise, each syllable shaped by years of boardroom battles, but sharpened now by pain and justice. Heather Cole, Naomi repeated, her voice filling the aisle. You are dismissed. Remove your wings and sit in the galley until security escorts you off. You're not to interact with any more passengers. Heather's hands shook as she unclipped her badge. The small silver pin that once represented pride now felt like a weight she couldn't hold. She placed it on the drink cart, tears streaking her face. Please, she whispered. I have children. I didn't mean. Naomi's gaze didn't waver. You meant every choice leading up to this moment. My hope is that this consequence teaches you what compassion should have taught you long ago. Passengers murmured, some nodding, some shifting uncomfortably as though recognizing themselves in Naomi's words. Michael Grant's voice was still faintly audible over the interphone. He was shouting at someone in the background, trying to salvage what little authority he had left. But the board's decision had been final. His words now sounded hollow, like echoes in an empty hangar. Captain James O'Connor stepped forward, his expression taut with the pressure of command. Miss Reynolds, he said quietly, how do you wish us to proceed? We're still at the gate. I can delay departure until this situation is fully resolved. Naomi nodded once. Yes, Captain. We will not depart until formal statements are taken from every passenger willing to provide one. Security will escort Ms. Cole and ensure Mr. Grant is removed from this operation. Dr. Alicia Parker moved closer. I'll draft my medical documentation now. It will confirm the assault and note your injury. She lifted her phone. I've also got the entire sequence recorded. Thank you, Doctor, Naomi said, her tone softer, gratitude breaking briefly through the steel. Meanwhile, Edward Blake fumbled with his phone, frantically trying to delete his earlier videos, but it was too late. Passengers near him were whispering, shaking their heads, some even pointing. Linda's face burned red as she scrolled through a news alert. Aurora CEO was already trending nationwide. Naomi turned to them, her voice lowered, but every syllable landed with weight. Mr. and Mrs. Blake, I heard your words earlier, about people not belonging in this cabin, about knowing someone's worth by how they carry themselves. I want you to reflect on what that means now, knowing you were celebrating violence against the very person who built the airline that gave you this seat. Edward's mouth opened, then closed. No excuse could survive in that silence. Naomi pivoted to the entire cabin. To those of you who spoke up, Dr. Parker, others, I thank you. To those who cheered or remained silent, I ask you to think carefully about what silence or complicity means in moments like these. Tonight isn't just about one slap. It's about every judgment, every suspicion, every time someone decides who belongs and who doesn't. The applause started small. 2 hands in row 3, then a ripple, then a wave of sound that filled the cabin. Naomi didn't smile. She let it wash past her. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Another message from her communications director media, requests already at 52 and rising. Crisis team is mobilized. Shall we prepare a statement? She typed back, not yet. I'm still in the middle of the story. Tonight is about accountability, not headlines. Captain O'Connor cleared his throat. Miss Reynolds, security has been notified. They'll be boarding shortly to escort Ms. Cole and collect Mr. Grant. Heather sobbed quietly in the galley, her face hidden in her hands. Ryan Fisher lingered near her, torn between pity and relief. Naomi caught his eye. You did the right thing, Ryan, she said gently. It takes courage to speak the truth when it's not the easy choice. He nodded, his throat too tight for words. The interphone crackled one final time. Michael Grant's voice, bitter and desperate. This isn't finished. Naomi stepped closer, her words sharp as glass. You're right, Mr. Grant. It isn't finished. It's only beginning, and it begins with you out of this company. Gasps met her declaration, followed by another round of applause. The cabin door opened. 2 security officers entered, eyes scanning the room, posture tense. One approached Naomi first. Miss Reynolds, we've been briefed. Are you all right? I am, Naomi replied. Escort Ms. Cole off this aircraft. She is no longer an employee of Aurora Airways, and ensure Mr. Grant is removed from airport operations tonight. Heather's sobs grew louder as the officers gently but firmly guided her up the aisle. Passengers recorded her walk of shame, some with grim satisfaction, others with pity. Naomi remained still, hands folded, as the weight of the moment pressed in. Her cheek still burned. Her heart beat steady. She knew this wasn't the end. It was the pivot, the point where the story transformed from humiliation into reckoning. The cabin door sealed shut again after security escorted Heather Cole down the jet bridge. The hum of the engines returned as if nothing had happened. But the passengers knew better. A thin electric charge lingered in the air, the aftertaste of chaos mixed with the weight of revelation. Naomi Reynolds lowered herself back into seat 2A. Her cheek still burned, a throbbing reminder of everything that had unfolded. But her posture remained composed. The eyes of every passenger followed her. She was no longer invisible, no longer dismissed. She was the center of the cabin's gravity, whether she had asked for it or not. Dr. Alicia Parker leaned across the aisle. Naomi, I've drafted my report. It's signed, time-stamped, And ready. If you'd like, I can email it directly to your legal team now." Naomi gave her a small nod. "Please do, and thank you. Your voice matters more than you know." Captain James O'Connor stood at the front of the cabin, hat tucked under his arm. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to inform you that this flight will experience a short delay. Statements are being collected from passengers who wish to provide them. We will not depart until the situation is fully documented." Applause spread again, uncoordinated but sincere. For the first time that evening, Naomi saw relief flicker across the captain's features. He had chosen integrity, even when it risked headlines and schedules. In row 4, Edward Blake shifted uncomfortably under the stares of fellow passengers. He muttered to Linda, "We should have kept quiet," but the microphones of smartphones around them picked up every syllable. His face flushed red. Linda only stared at the floor, shame weighing heavier than the champagne glass trembling in her hand. Naomi opened her phone and scrolled through the flood of notifications. News outlets had already picked up the story. Aurora CEO assaulted by flight attendant was flashing across tickers. Clips of the slap had already gone viral on Twitter and TikTok, reaching millions within minutes. Her communications director sent another message. "We need a statement. Naomi, silence will be interpreted as avoidance." "Shall I draft something?" Naomi hesitated. Her thumb hovered above the keyboard. Part of her longed to stay quiet, to process in private. But another part knew this wasn't just about her. It was about every black traveler who had endured the sting of suspicion without the shield of a title. She typed back, "Draft," but hold. "I want the truth of the cabin to be heard first. Let the witnesses speak. Then I'll speak." Ryan Fisher approached cautiously, still pale but steadier than before. "Miss Reynolds, I want to apologize. I should have spoken up sooner. I saw what was happening. I knew it was wrong." But his voice broke. "I didn't want to lose my job." Naomi studied him for a long moment. "Fear silences many good people, Ryan, but silence allows harm to grow. What matters is that you spoke when it counted most. Don't waste that courage now." He nodded, eyes wet. "I won't." The captain returned to the cockpit briefly, speaking with operations. When he reappeared, his voice carried both relief and gravity. "Miss Reynolds, the board is on a secure conference line. They'd like you to join from the cabin if you're ready." Naomi stood once more, her presence commanding but calm. The interphone handset felt strangely heavy in her hand. The same tool Heather had used to summon Grant, now repurposed for justice. "Richard," she said into the line. The chairman's voice resonated clearly. "Naomi, the board is assembled. We've seen the footage. The world has seen it. What is your directive?" She inhaled deeply, eyes sweeping across the cabin. Dozens of passengers leaned forward, their faces reflecting a mix of awe, guilt, and anticipation. Every phone camera stayed trained on her. "My directive," Naomi began slowly, "is that this company no longer treats incidents like these as isolated misconduct. Tonight is not a single crew member's failing. It is the symptom of a culture that allowed suspicion to outweigh dignity. That culture ends now." The cabin erupted in applause. Passengers who had once looked at her with disdain now clapped with urgency, some even standing. Edward tried to blend into his seat, but Naomi's eyes found him. She didn't call his name, didn't shame him directly, but her words carried weight enough. Discrimination isn't just what one person does in a moment of anger. It's also the laughs that support it, the silence that excuses it, and the systems that ignore it. This aircraft will not leave the ground until those truths are acknowledged. Richard Coleman's voice came steady, resolute. Naomi, you have the board's unanimous support. Announce whatever policies you see fit, effective immediately. Her chest rose and fell slowly. She could feel the momentum shifting not just within the cabin, but across an industry already glued to live feeds. She looked around, her voice soft but unyielding. Then we begin tonight. Every Aurora Airways employee will undergo immediate anti-bias retraining. Every complaint will be reviewed by an independent third party, and every crew member will be reminded that their authority is not a weapon, but a responsibility to protect dignity. The passengers roared with approval. Some clapped, some cried. Phones caught it all. Naomi set the handset down and returned to her seat. Her body trembled with the aftershock of adrenaline. But her spirit held firm. The turning point had come. What began as humiliation had transformed into reckoning, and the flight was no longer just a journey from Los Angeles to New York. It was the beginning of something far larger. The aircraft finally pushed back from the gate, the cabin buzzing with the energy of something far greater than an ordinary red-eye flight. As the engines roared and the nose lifted into the night sky, Naomi Reynolds closed her eyes for a brief moment. The city lights of Los Angeles melted into a sea of darkness beneath her, a quiet reminder of how small one person could feel even when carrying the weight of a company, a movement, a history. The seatbelt sign dinged. The hum of ascent steadied into the cruising drone, but no one in the cabin settled into the usual rhythm of pillows and movies and drinks. The atmosphere was too charged, as though the passengers had all boarded one flight but found themselves on another entirely, one bound for a destination no itinerary had promised. Naomi adjusted in her seat, her cheek still tender, the cut stinging lightly with every movement. She dabbed it gently with the cloth Dr. Parker had provided. The doctor leaned across the aisle, her voice warm but professional. You're going to bruise, but it will heal, and the record is already clear. The evidence is strong. Naomi offered a faint smile. The wound isn't the problem, Doctor. It's what the wound represents. Doctor. Parker nodded knowingly. And what it can inspire, if people are willing to look honestly. Ryan Fisher approached timidly, a tray in his hands. His voice was careful, his posture deferential. Miss Reynolds, may I offer you something to eat or drink? I'll prepare it myself. Naomi studied him for a moment before nodding. Water will do. He placed the glass on her tray table with both hands, almost reverently. I'm sorry, he whispered, for not doing more. Her gaze softened slightly. You did more than you think, Ryan. You spoke the truth when it mattered. The silence before that was fear. The words after that was courage. Remember which one changes things. He bowed his head. Yes, ma'am. As Ryan retreated, Edward and Linda Blake exchanged nervous glances. The earlier smugness had drained from them entirely, replaced by something brittle, like glass about to shatter. Edward shifted, then blurted out, Miss Reynolds. Well, we didn't mean... I suppose we didn't realize. Naomi turned her head slowly, her eyes steady. Didn't realize what? Mr. Blake. That I was human. That I was worthy of this seat without a title attached. He stammered, cheeks red. We spoke out of turn. You spoke out of belief, Naomi corrected softly. And now you must decide if you'll leave this cabin unchanged, or if you'll take tonight as proof that belief can be unlearned." Linda's eyes glistened. She nodded quickly, as if desperate to distance herself from her husband's arrogance. "We were wrong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Naomi didn't answer. She simply turned back to her window, leaving the couple to sit with the weight of their own reflection. Across the aisle, other passengers were whispering, their phones glowing as they uploaded clips, typed captions, and joined the chorus online. The hashtags swirled faster than the jet streams outside. Naomi Reynolds, Justice in the Skies, Aurora Awakening. Captain O'Connor emerged once more, his steps deliberate, his shoulders square. He addressed the cabin with the authority of command, but his voice carried an unusual humility. "Ladies and gentlemen, as captain of this aircraft, I want to acknowledge what happened tonight. It should never have occurred. Every passenger is entitled to dignity and respect aboard this plane. Miss Reynolds has reminded us all of that truth." Applause broke out, rolling through the cabin like a wave. Some passengers even stood. Naomi remained seated, but her eyes met his. She gave the smallest nod respect earned, not demanded. The captain continued, "We will continue safely to New York, but let me be clear, this company will not leave this incident behind. It will follow us to the ground and beyond. Tonight will mark change." When he returned to the cockpit, Naomi leaned back. Her mind wandered, not to the bruises, not even to the policies already forming in her head, but to memories older than the airline itself. She remembered her grandmother's stories of buses in Montgomery, of marches where people locked arms and sang despite jeers. She remembered her mother's tears the first time Naomi boarded a plane for college. Whispering, "Go higher than we ever could." The echo of those voices pressed close now, reminding her that this night was not an isolated humiliation but part of a longer, harsher lineage and, perhaps, a turning point in it. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a video link from her communications team, the SLAP. Replayed, looped, already at 3 million views. The comments scrolled too fast to read. Some were outraged, some were ashamed, some were defensive, but all of them were watching. Naomi let the video play once, then closed it. She had no desire to relive the pain on screen. She carried enough of it in her skin. Instead, she began to write not a press release, not a memo, but notes about training, about accountability, about oversight, notes about what she would demand when the board met again, notes that would eventually form the foundation of something larger than a viral clip. Hours passed, the cabin dimmed, some passengers slept uneasily, others whispered still. The Blakes stayed silent, their shame too thick to pierce. Ryan checked on Naomi twice, each time with careful respect. Dr. Parker dozed lightly, her phone clutched in her hand like a record she was determined not to lose. And Naomi. She remained awake, eyes open to the hum of the dark sky beyond the window. At 34,000 feet, she felt the bruises of history and the hope of change pressing equally against her. For the first time since Heather's hand struck her, Naomi allowed herself a breath, not of restraint, but of resolve. This flight would land. The world would keep spinning, but nothing would return to what it had been before tonight. The story of Naomi Reynolds reminds us that dignity is not granted by wealth, status, or appearance. It is a birthright. Too often, people are judged by the surface clothing, color, accents, or assumptions about where they belong. But what unfolded on that flight shows us that injustice can be confronted not through anger, but through calm clarity, resolve, and truth. For older generations who have seen decades of change, this moment is both painful and hopeful. Painful because it echoes struggles many believed were left behind. Hopeful because it proves progress is still possible when individuals stand firm. Naomi's refusal to bow to humiliation, her insistence on accountability, and her vision for reform offer a lesson for us all. Silence allows prejudice to grow, but one voice can spark systemic change. In our daily lives, whether at work, in families, or communities, we face choices between looking away or speaking up. This story calls us to choose courage, even quietly, even respectfully, because small acts of truth accumulate into movements of justice. And, as Naomi showed, when we act with dignity, we don't just defend ourselves, we help redefine the standard for everyone. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. Stories like Naomi's remind us not only of the challenges people face, but of the strength and hope that rise from them. If her courage moved you, let's keep this conversation alive. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the stories that matter most. Together, we can stand for dignity, for justice, and for each other.